know your worth and defend it. I didn't sit down and let that happen. I ran for the school board and I won, and we saved our neighborhood schools. From there, I realized the reason why our schools are shutting down in Austin and all over this state is because Greg Abbott, he takes our money and he doesn't put it back into our schools. He doesn't put it back into our communities. So I ran for the Texas House to get back that money, and I won. And that's where I've been fighting in the trenches with colleagues you just heard from tonight, fighting the good fight, because guess what? I've never been afraid of Greg Abbott. And I'm certainly not afraid of him now.
So, 4 days ago, a state legislator from Austin, a mom, a public school advocate, a person who raised $1.3 million from regular people, won the Democratic nomination for governor of Texas. She did it against a field of opponents backed by a $105 million war chest. Her name is Gina Hinojosa, and her central argument is this: Texas isn't a low-tax state. It's a high-cost state. And the difference, she says, is the Abbott tax. Now, we're going to decode that argument today, because the receipts she's bringing are specific, they're sourced, and they deserve a closer look, regardless of which party you call home. I'm Jordan Vale. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of story that gets buried on a Saturday, and it shouldn't be.
Well, he can keep his dirty campaign money, and we'll have the people of Texas with us. It was just revealed last month in a bombshell report by an independent watchdog group that Greg Abbott has given almost $1 billion in no-bid contracts to his donors. That is a level of corruption the likes of which we have not seen in Texas. Greg Abbott is the most corrupt governor in Texas history, and people are starting to understand. If you look at the latest polling, the governor is underwater in the state of Texas. He's underwater generally with independents and with Latinos. So people have found out who Governor Abbott is. People want change all over the state. I'm hearing from people that it is time for change.
And that's from October. She's been saying it for months. A $105 million machine, and she's the one with a receipt. Here's where that money actually comes from. Let's start with the money, because the contrast is where the argument lives. As of January 2026, Governor Greg Abbott's campaign war chest sits at $105.1 million. That's not a typo. $105 million for a Texas gubernatorial race. To put that in perspective, that's more than most U.S. Senate campaigns raise in a competitive cycle. Hinojosa, running on a grassroots model, raised approximately $1.3 million in late 2025. The financial gap between these two campaigns is roughly 81-1. Now, a big war chest isn't inherently a scandal. Governors raise a lot of money. But where that money comes from tells you something about who the campaign answers to. And Hinojosa is pointing specifically at one donor as the clearest example of her argument. Javed Anwar is a Midland oil executive. He gave $1.6 million to Abbott's campaign in a single reported contribution, more than Hinojosa raised in an entire fundraising period. Anwar is one contributor among many, but the scale of that single check is the point Hinojosa is making. When one person's donation exceeds your opponent's entire fundraising haul, she argues, that donor isn't buying access, he's buying outcomes. The research behind this comes from the Texas Tribune and the San Antonio Express News, which tracked the 2026 donor landscape in detail. This isn't an allegation, it's a campaign finance disclosure. The money is on the record. Anyone can pull it. And Hinojosa is betting that when regular Texans see it laid out, the numbers do the arguing for her. So what does Hinojosa raise? According to her campaign filings, the $1.3 million she brought in came from a broad base of small donors, the kind of fundraising model that depends on volume rather than check size. Her victory speech 4 days ago specifically called out the unprecedented nature of a grassroots campaign making it this far in Texas statewide politics. And here's where the argument gets pointed. She's not just saying Abbott raises more money. She's saying that the donor class funding his campaign is the same donor class that benefits when the state prioritizes their interests over local infrastructure, local schools, and the local tax base that regular Texans actually pay into. That's the core of the Abbott Tax thesis, and the donor gap is Exhibit A, which is a pretty striking thing to be able to document with public filings. So here's what I want the folks who've been watching Texas politics for 30 years to hear in that. This isn't new. Big donors, big outcomes. That story is as old as the Capitol. But what Hinojosa is doing differently is putting a dollar figure on it and connecting it directly to costs you're already paying. That's not a campaign speech. That's an accounting problem. And she's got the receipts. So while all of that donor money was flowing in, Texas was also sitting on one of the largest budget surpluses in state history. The figure varies by source. Estimates range from $24 billion to $33 billion, depending on how the rainy day fund and projected revenues are counted. But the floor is enormous by any measure. Governor Abbott signed a $10 billion property tax relief package, which his office has promoted as the largest property tax cut in Texas history. That's a real number. It's a real piece of legislation. And if you're evaluating it on its own terms, cutting $10 billion in property taxes is genuinely significant. Hinojosa's counterargument is not that the relief didn't happen. It's that $10 billion against a $24 to $33 billion surplus is a fraction of what was available, and that the structural problems driving costs up weren't addressed. The failing power grid, the rising homeowners insurance, the infrastructure gaps that show up in your monthly bills rather than your tax statement. Her term for it is the Abbott Tax, the argument that every dollar you pay for an unreliable grid, for insurance premiums driven up by under-regulated risk, for the infrastructure gaps that appear in your monthly bills rather than your tax statement, that's a tax. It just doesn't come with a line item. After Winter Storm Uri in 2021, some Texas residents received electric bills in the thousands of dollars because the deregulated grid had no price caps during the crisis. And Texas homeowners insurance premiums have risen sharply as carriers price in the risk of infrastructure that can't guarantee stability. These costs don't show up on a tax form, but Hinojosa argues they're traceable directly to decisions made at the state level. The $10 billion relief package in her framing is the administration offering a coupon on a bill they helped create. That's the token relief argument. Not that it didn't happen, but that it's disproportionate to the scale of the surplus and the structural problems underneath it. Whether you agree with that framing or not, it's a documentable argument built on real numbers. So let's hear how she puts it herself.
Your electricity bill, does it feel like it costs more and more to pay your electricity bills these days? Because it does. Because after Winter Storm Uri, when we were literally freezing to death in our homes, and the gas companies withheld the fuel we needed for the grid until the prices were so high that they could make billions of dollars in profits in hours. Greg Abbott let them get away with it and then decided that we would foot the bill for those profits. He got a $1 million campaign check from the CEO of one of those gas companies for his troubles.
Let's get the numbers straight, because the distinction matters. The $10 billion tax relief is real. Abbott signed it. It passed. And for a lot of Texans, it made a difference on their property tax bill. What Hinojosa is arguing is about proportion and priority. A $33 billion surplus and $10 billion back is a choice. And she's saying it was the wrong one. The third piece of the Abbott tax argument is where the housing market comes in. And this is the one that hits hardest for anyone who's tried to buy a home in Texas in the last 3 years. Hinojosa has introduced House Bill 2334, which would restrict investment firms from purchasing single-family homes within the first 30 days of a listing. The intent is to give individual buyers, families, first-time homeowners, a window to compete before institutional money can step in with cash offers. Here's the problem the bill is responding to. Private equity and institutional investment firms have been buying single-family homes in Texas markets at scale. They don't need a mortgage approval. They don't need 30 days. They can close in 72 hours with a cash offer that individual buyers can't match. Not because the buyers can't afford the home, but because the process favors capital over people. A family pre-approved for a mortgage loses to an all-cash institutional bid before they even finish their inspection. The result is what housing advocates are calling a starter home shortage in markets like Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston. Homes that would have been entry-level purchases a decade ago are being bought, held, and rented back to the same families who could have owned them, at monthly rates that in many cases exceed what a mortgage payment would have been. The family that couldn't compete with the cash offer is now writing a rent check to the firm that outbid them. Hinojosa's 30-day waiting period doesn't ban institutional investment. It doesn't prevent firms from buying homes after that window closes. It just says, for the first month a home is on the market, a Texas family gets the first shot. And here's the pro-monopoly angle she's building toward. The state government that claims to be pro-business and pro-freedom has not moved to protect individual buyers from being systematically outbid in their own housing market. HB 2334 is her legislative receipt for that argument, a specific bill on the record that puts a 30-day shield between Texas families and the institutional cash machine. The graphic you're seeing right now is the difference between a family's mortgage timeline and an institutional cash offer timeline. That gap is what the bill is designed to close, and it's a pretty concrete thing to be able to point to. And for anyone who's been house hunting in the last 2 years, you already know this story. You found the house, you got pre-approved, you made the offer, and you lost to a cash buyer you never even saw. That, according to Hinojosa's platform, isn't bad luck. It's the result of specific policy choices. And HB 2334 is the first time I've seen a statewide candidate put a fix on the table. Here's the contradiction Hinojosa is building the whole campaign around. And it's worth laying out cleanly because it's the thing that ties the donor gap, the surplus, and the housing market together into a single argument. The state of Texas has built its political brand almost entirely on the word freedom. Free markets, free enterprise, low regulation. The idea that Texas is the place where business can operate without the government picking winners and losers. That's the pitch. Greg Abbott has used that language consistently for over a decade in office. But Hinojosa's argument is that the pro-business brand has quietly become pro-monopoly, and the difference matters enormously. Pro-business means the market is open, competition is protected, and individual actors, including individual families trying to buy a home or keep their lights on, can participate on reasonably fair terms. Pro-monopoly means the rules are written for whoever already has the capital, and everyone else competes for what's left. The private equity housing issue is her clearest example. A free market in housing would mean families and investment firms compete on the same terms. But when institutional buyers can move in cash within 72 hours and individual buyers need 30 days to close a mortgage, that's not a free market. The rules favor one class of buyer over another, and the state hasn't moved to address it. The same logic applies to the grid. After Winter Storm Uri in 2021, Texas had a documented catastrophic infrastructure failure. The free market argument would say competition and accountability would fix it. But the grid operators faced no meaningful penalties, no structural changes were mandated, and the cost of that unreliability got passed to consumers in the form of, in Hinojosa's framing, a hidden tax. So the contradiction she's pointing at isn't just about policy disagreements. It's about whether the freedom brand is being applied consistently. If freedom means individual Texans can compete on fair terms in the housing market, in the energy market, in the tax structure, then the receipts she's presenting suggest the brand and the reality are running in different directions. That's the argument. And it's one that lands differently when a candidate can back it up with specific legislation and specific donor disclosures, rather than just a talking point. So here's where I land. Gina Hinojosa just won a Democratic primary against an 80-1 money disadvantage. And she did it by making the low tax brand of Texas politics into a math problem. The $33 billion surplus, the $1.6 million check, the 72-hour cash offer that beat your pre-approval. These aren't talking points, they're receipts. And whether you vote for her or not, the argument she's making deserves a direct answer, not a campaign ad. The machine has $105 million. She has a spreadsheet and a bill number. We'll find out in November which one Texas trusts. Thanks for spending a few minutes digging into this with me. If you want more grounded, progressive commentary without the outrage bait, subscribe and stick around. Every time you watch, share, and engage, it helps build a community that believes democracy is worth understanding and defending. I'll see you in the next video.